Coming up next, Sitting at 30 takes you downtown for the weekly luncheon meeting of the City Club of Portland. Live weekly coverage of City Club is made possible in part by TCI and is produced through the facilities of Portland Cable Access. Now we join the City Club for this week's program.
In the fall of 1997, the Arts and Culture Committee gave special attention to the declining emphasis on the arts in Portland's schools and to the struggling situation of several local arts agencies. To examine this situation, the committee convened a meeting of business and organizational leaders in January 1998 to discuss these matters and to recommend a way for the committee to explore it more fully. The question of the public value of the arts was felt to be especially timely and important, partly because matters of civic concern best fit the City Club's purpose, and because public funding of the arts depends on citizen perceptions that the arts enrich the community as a whole. And this was reinforced by a report from the American Assembly, which is a gathering of nationally prominent governmental, university, business, and arts leaders, which at its May 1997 meeting issued a report calling for a national focus on the public role of the arts. And we saw our effort as one that might contribute to this national focus. The recommendation from this initial planning group was simple. Bring together Portlanders and ask them for their thoughts on the role the arts play in the community. At the same time, the recommendation was to feature a few well-known speakers in City Club-sponsored forums to highlight the arts in Portland and the project. As the report notes, the activities carried out between November 1998 and April 1999 included 2 Friday luncheon addresses, one by William Ivey, newly appointed chair of the National Endowment for the Arts, and one by James DePriest, music director of the Oregon Symphony. There was also a breakfast address, a breakfast address by Alan Simpson, former senator from Wyoming and director of the Institute for Policy Studies at Harvard, who the preceding year had given the national Nancy Hanks National Lecture on the Arts. And these were put together with a number of brown bag lunches which are described in the report, so I won't go into them, but I urge everyone to read the report and particularly the summaries of the comments by those who attended. These summaries, I'm afraid, are all too brief given the substantial and enthusiastic discussions that took place, but they do capture much of what was said, and it was really in the things said by people who came to these discussions that we found the strongest sense of enthusiasm for a focus on the arts in Portland. In the coming year, the Arts and Culture Committee will seek ways, including sharing the report and information about the process of its development with groups in other Oregon cities, to encourage other cities in Oregon to carry out a similar local effort to define the role of the arts in their communities, and other ways to use the report to broaden public attention to the place of the arts in Portland. In closing, I want to emphasize 3 things about this project. First, the report reflects the importance of the City Club of Portland as an agency through which civic matters can be discussed. In this case, what I think often is thought of as an off-center, and maybe some would even call it peripheral, topic, that is the arts, have the same central attention as any other civic issue. The arts were seen as important to Portland's civic culture. And why not? We are talking about the imaginative life of the city. Second point is that the process brought together a variety of people from outside the arts community. There were certainly people from within the arts community, but many came whose background was in business, in government, in other organizational work, but who have a strong sense of place and the same hopes for a better city. So that the project was not parochial in its investigation. It really did reach out to a number of other sectors within the community. And finally, I think the value of the issue committees within the City Club structure was made clear as a mechanism through which members and non-members can explore questions that are important to the city. So finally, I would say this. It seems especially appropriate that the report is presented today in the context of Representative Blumenauer's address, partly because I know the arts have been a matter of importance to him throughout his civic life, and because the arts are critical to any consideration of the quality of life in Portland, about which he will in part be speaking. Thank you very much.
Do we have any comments from anyone from the floor?
Sir, thank you for all of your work this past year.
Nice job. New members with City Club are Frank Rugloff, an architect with MCA Architects, and Serena Cruz, Multnomah County Commissioner. I didn't see either one of you come in, but if you're here, would you please stand? On Friday, July the 16th, join us for a special program on the status of Oregon's children and families with outgoing Director of State Office of Services for Children and Families, Kate Horan. It'll be here at the Multnomah Athletic Club. Our board host today, seated at the head table, is Arnold Kogan, member of the Board of Governors and managing partner with Kogan Owens Kogan. He will ask the first question. Following Arnold's question, we'll open the program to questions from City Club members in the audience. With the microphone here, please identify yourself as a member and confine your questions to less than 30 seconds if possible. The broadcast of City Club programs this quarter is made possible in part because of corporate contributions from CH2M Hill, Weyerhaeuser, Pacific Care of Oregon. We're grateful for their support. When my wife Pauline and I walked in today, we walked in with Earl Blumenauer, and I was reminded in seeing that happen that one of Earl's long ago predecessors, Bob Duncan, used to arrive at the airport at 11:30 in the morning for a speech before City Club, which always kind of internalized a lot of stress for the program about whether he'd make it on time, and he usually did. Sometimes a little late, so there was filler time from time to time. Earl has been a familiar face before the club. For the last 25 years, he's been involved in one way or another in political activities, starting with a statewide committee chairmanship on trying to get the voting age lowered to 18. He's been active in state, local, and regional and national politics now since then. He's been a state representative, a county commissioner, a city councilman, and now a congressman. One of the things that he whispered in one of the elected officials when he was a local politician was, you only need to count to 3. I don't know whether that's when you've got a governing body of 5, but that's a message. He's a big picture man, and he's focused his attention on important issues to Portland and the state. He's been extensively involved in light rail, bicycle paths, and other transportation problems, and has focused on environmental issues that have promoted Portland and Oregon as one of the most livable states in the country. Earl currently serves on the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. He's the co-founder and co-chair of Livable Communities Task Force and a member of the House Sustainable Development Caucus. And he is part of the Bipartisan Bike Caucus. His quickness of mind and good humor help give a balanced perspective, which is sorely needed. As you're aware, Earl belongs to no organized political party. He's a Democrat. During his congressional career, he came in at the end of the federal government shutdown over a budget dispute, the impeachment of the president, and now a budget surplus that can stretch into the trillions. Earl, what's next? Earl Blumenauer.
Thank you, Lloyd. Well, it is a privilege to be here today. I am privileged in particular to be joined by members of my staff. I have the alternative tie. They have a rule that I'm not allowed to wear a tie that is a bow tie that is bigger than my head. In fact, since nobody is rushing the podium to make me change it, I'd like to have the members of my staff who are here stand. Could you just? I really do appreciate their patience here with me. Actually, there are two of them that this may be their last official act. Trina Butron and Christine Egan, who've been. Why don't you stand up again just for a second? These are folks who have been students at Portland State University, deeply involved in this livability stuff, carrying their issues above. Trina, you want to sit down? Is this it? That's okay. That's okay. Carrying their own passions far beyond what happens in the office. Trina, particularly with housing, and she gave me lots of coaching in the food line today. And Christine has been working on issues relating to the gorge and Johnson Creek, and they're both going on to follow that. And I really appreciate your sticking with us right through today's luncheon to make sure that I stay on point. I am very happy to be here this week. I guess it is summer this week when spring finally came to Portland. Those of you who are organized with the food bank, you notice that it was a financial success this year. I think it's because Jerry Tippins and Rick Gustafson negotiated a very lucrative concession on hand warmers down there. It was my privilege to bring the part of the message to some of my colleagues in Congress who are on the House Appropriations Subcommittee dealing with the Interior, who were here over the course of the week, and they had a chance to really appreciate what Oregon and the Northwest are about. We had them at Crown Point being able to look west to the potential growth from the metropolitan areas, east to the Columbia River Gorge and what we're fighting to protect there, and watching as they were slowly starting to get it, wearing down vests and having blue lips. I guess there's a reason that the Scots have been attracted to Pacific Power. I'm getting a little tired of the people in Washington, D.C. I mean, the jokes about the weather, I think I've had 500 people who saw the joke in the L.A. Times and the Washington Post about what people say to the Pillsbury Doughboy in Portland. Nice tan. You know, but then the sun comes out, all is forgiven, and we understand why we're here. I think I saved a cumulative 190 degrees by spending this week in Portland rather than in Washington, D.C. with the yellow air pollution alerts and the 100-degree plus weather. I think it's safe to say now, Robert Liberty, that it's really not our statewide land use policy that is our growth management strategy. It's meteorology. It's the weather, stupid, that holds it down to just 75 people a day moving in, not 500 or 1,000. Unfortunately for us, global warming may actually screw up our population limitation strategy, and we better get serious about 2040 and livable community strategy. And I'm, I guess, assuming the worst about global warming, and I would like to make my 10th presentation to the City Club, one about livability and what we're going to have to do to maintain it. It's no secret that this livability interest has exploded nationally in the last few years. You've seen the articles in the national publications. You've seen national politicians, particularly the Vice President, who've taken it on. I'm personally working very hard to make sure that it is a bipartisan issue in the next election, that people are going to be looking for ways for both parties and for all the major candidates to find ways to contribute to this discussion of livability. My goal this afternoon is for us to have a conversation about that. And I would like, in aiding that conversation, I would like to share with you a few of my thoughts about it in terms of what we're looking at nationally and what, more important, we're looking at locally. A livable community is a definition that we've been struggling with. We talked about it when I was last before the City Club. I think it boils down to simply how we assure that our families are safe, healthy, and economically secure. And there are 5 elements that I think are evolving to be a part of that definition. First, our livable communities must be economically and environmentally sustainable, that we don't gobble up the land exponentially and inappropriately, we don't squander our water, and we don't foster development that we cannot afford to service over time. A livable community is where you feel safe. Not just statistics that suggest that crime is going down. It's not just the strategies in the background, but really where it strikes home and people know that they are safe on the streets with their family. A livable community ties the pieces together that we have to deal with all our multiple development and social connections. I'm not supposed to use the word multi-management objectives. Multi-objective management, rather. I don't quite, A, I can't remember it. B, you don't know what I'm talking about when I say it. But there is that concept that where the product is greater than the sum of the parts that we weave together. And it is something that we need to continue making the use of our resources more and more intelligent. It is not about new taxes or regulation. Frankly, if we do our job right, we can do better than a system that is regulatory driven, that was characteristic of how we started many of these efforts 20 years ago. It was entirely appropriate at that time with the Clean Air Act and the Clean Water Act to be regulatory in nature. But we have the potential today, based on the last 20 years' experience, to do better. A livable community gives realistic choices to our families, where they live, how they move, and their education. And finally, a livable community welcomes all our citizens as full partners. Whether or not citizens have the wherewithal to be personally involved, and whether we can successfully engage them in continuing that involvement as a sustained basis to solve problems, is in large measure going to determine whether or not we're successful in meeting our challenge of livable communities. I receive a lot of questions around the country because people read some of the national press about what's going on here in Oregon. What's the deal with the urban growth boundary and light rail and your legislature? It looks to a lot of people in other parts of the country like we are turning our back on and pulling back from where, and in fact trying to move towards where a lot of America is trying to escape. And it's something that we, I think, in this room, particularly those of us who've been involved with the City Club and been involved with these issues for, in some cases, decades, as I looked at some of the distinguished people on this panel. How do I answer those questions about what's going on here? Livability is more than just vehicle miles traveled and our struggle to reduce it, or bike lanes, or post offices and urban growth boundaries. Indeed, I think there is a danger that some of us in this room, as we start to throwing around the facts and the figures and the trend lines and the acronyms and performance indicators, that we miss the point in terms of how to engage people. So what? Excuse me, Bob Stacy and other Feeney, other people from Primal. So what if ridership has gone up? What is it, 76 consecutive months? Or that max ridership has doubled in the course of the last year, not just with the opening of the west side, but a substantial increase as a result on the east side, as we hoped and planned that it would. The great housing debate Does the urban growth boundary and all our rules and regulations, are we driving up the cost of housing, making it unaffordable here in Portland? Well, personally, I think what we've done in the metropolitan area, we win that argument hands down in terms of providing a broad range of affordable options for people, Trina. Here, I'm getting this right? Nod, yes, okay. And that if we get hung up in a debate about the distribution curve, about whether it's market-driven or cost-pushed, it again bogs us down, because really what we have to make sure is that families must feel here in Portland that they are getting quality and value, or else they're not going to invest. And it's all irrelevant unless we can capture and communicate why the total cost of living in our livable community is a terrific value for the people who live here. We are better positioned than any city in America to achieve our vision of a livable community. The question is whether we can engage the public to continue to be our partners with us, and whether the current circumstances, the current challenges are such that we can continue moving forward. One of the things I love about an opportunity to join with you at the City Club is that it's an excuse to try and think really grandly. You can only put a tiny fraction of what you think about in a presentation like this, but you have to be prepared for all the embarrassing questions that must come forward. And it is an opportunity really for me to get energized. And there are a number of you in this room who were kind enough to share some thoughts and observations for me, and it's actually helping fuel, I think, what's going to happen for the next 6 or 8 months, so to help me get up in the morning smiling and excited. But there are a few things that I want to touch on, to think of in terms of tremendous opportunities for us to fashion and capture that vision. One has to do with linking the salmon recovery issues, the endangered species listing, and combined sewer overflow, and how we're going to solve that. We're only a little way through that. We see that we're going to be spending hundreds of millions of dollars. It's going to be complex. We're going to do things differently, each and every one of us. But it has the potential of not being just another construction project. It's not just another thing we've got to do because of some environmental regulation. But it is an opportunity with the sort of the vision, energy, and enthusiasm, the planning that's going on right now with the city, metro, a number of our jurisdictions, to really transform what our community looks like. Daylighting creeks, linear parks, transforming the waterways, wetland restoration, changing our patterns of how we use the land in our own backyard to really make Portland an even more exciting region. There's a struggle going on right now with our city council, leading the battle for competition in the arcane world of high-speed internet connections. It is not a little arcane sort of goofy thing that AT&T is doing any more than some of the struggles with whether or not there's going to be free access to the book-selling industry, or all sorts of little things that in total really are going to make a difference in how information flows. There is a profound question going on right now with whether or not we're going to have the wherewithal to follow through on our 2040 plan. We've invested 25 years in that, educating the population, defining the tools to achieve it. And really, what that is, look back in the index, I think it's in Kim's book, Shaping of the City, where he's got the size of the city of Portland and the number of people who live per acre. What we're talking about with the 2040 plan is being able to come close after we have almost 700,000 people move here. Whether or not we can achieve population densities that we had in the city of Portland at the turn of the century, when we had the Lewis and Clark Centennial. Can we do that when we're no longer polluting with horse manure and heating with coal and sawdust? And we have the modern conveniences modern, what we've learned. Can we achieve what we had in Portland at the turn of the century? I think it's possible. We've restarted the rail agenda. We talked about that when I was here 2 years ago. We have not one, not two, we have 3 projects moving forward. Rail to the airport, ground is going to be broken next week. We've broken ground on the first streetcar in this country in over half a century, and we're well on the way with Max North. IMAX? And I believe sincerely that if we put those pieces together for IMAX going north to Jansen Beach, that that's the key to being to Vancouver and finishing the regional pattern. There is a very significant set of issues that are emerging in our deregulated energy environment, where the Portland metropolitan area is kind of an island in the Pacific Northwest. Are we going to get the benefits of the hydro system, or are they somehow going to actually not just be frittered, not be captured somewhere else in the region? But I think if we're not able to solve the problem for Portland residents getting their fair share, we may lose that resource to the Pacific Northwest. Finally, there's a very exciting set of activities going on here in the private philanthropic community. I look at projects like New Avenues for Youth, where there are private citizens who are bringing together not just their resources to do some things differently, but helping government look at how it provides services to our youth, homeless and otherwise. I will resist the temptation to go through the litany of what I see in terms of the state's challenges. They are profound. My heart goes out to the people that are dealing with the state legislature. I want the Congressional Medal of Freedom to be struck for Governor Kitzhaber. But I will say there's one other issue that I would add to the list for both the state and the local metropolitan area. And it's an issue of understanding the role that the metropolitan area plays in making the state's economy work. That there's a synergy going on between Portland metropolitan area, which has been driving the economy, and you've had presentations here before the City Club that's gone into that in great detail. But we've got to have a way to make that connection with our friends around the state, that we are truly in this together in a way that we've never been before. I think the evidence is clear. There are people of goodwill that are trying to reach out, but we've got to all make that a priority, or else our state is going to flounder politically, economically, and socially. I'm very optimistic today that we're going to be able to pull those pieces together. I am optimistic that we're going to be able to turn the corner, breaking the impasse surrounding some of the educational static that's going forward, and that the people's voice will be heard in terms of that being a priority for the state. I am optimistic about achieving our livability agenda for 3 reasons. First, I think we have the opportunity to organize the people resources in this region to make a difference. I know that there are some that lament the loss of corporate headquarters from the Portland metropolitan area, and I've listened to that, I've thought about it. There are many times when it would be useful to have more corporate headquarters here. It would make some things easier. But if you take a step back and think of the collective talent that is here in the metropolitan area, there has, I think, never been a time when there has been more and varied talent available to us to be a part of that team. There is more wealth in our community than ever in our history, if we're smart enough to figure out how to organize and channel it. And the point is not whether there may be more government money someplace or more private wealth someplace else. The question is whether or not there is enough here for us to solve our problems. And I think that answer is yes. if we're all willing to do our part. And I know Greg Chalet has some ideas right here for those of you who are here with the Community Foundation. Sally, I know you've got brochures. And there's lots of potential here for us to be engaged. I am struck that there is a new team that is being built, whether it is some of our senior statespeople, I know that have been involved for decades, who continue to be involved. When Tom Walsh had some problems with the tunnel, there was Mort Bishop and a number of folks who've been around here over time. There are people who are finding new roles. I think of Bob Waddell, who's been involved in a number of different roles over time, who's shifted gears professionally, but is no less involved as virtually a full-time citizen. Former Commissioner Kafori has shifted gears, but no less involved. I note there's some interesting family teams with Don Frisbee and his daughter-in-law Denise Frisbee working on some of these educational issues, and we've read about them in the paper. There are young people coming forward that are amazing. There's the 18-year-old young man who was Chris Bergstrom, who's elected to the Tualatin City Council. There's an opportunity here for us to be able to tie into a broad cross-section of people who hitherto have not been involved. I would suggest that there is an opportunity for us to take back the initiative process from a few people. I want to be polite when I say this, but I characterize them as extremists with a business plan. These are people who've understood how to make a living exploiting the initiative process with things that sound good, that appeal to a few deep-pocketed people with strong convictions, and drive the rest of us crazy. How much time and energy, public and private, has been spent by a few people who, for their own business and philosophical reasons, have made a very good living, thank you, driving the initiative process. I think what we need to do collectively is find some ways to recapture that initiative process and have a series of positive choices for our voters, not waiting for the other side to come up with things, and then we spend more time, more energy, more money, more anguish trying to beat them back. And even if we're only successful 9 times out of 10 beating them back, the one that slips through has tremendous destructive capacity. We have the potential of making the political system fair again through the initiative process. We can match risks and rewards, costs and benefits. We can fix the rules through the initiative process. For example, the number of people that it takes to impose restrictions on the rest of us. If it's going to be a supermajority, it ought to pass by a supermajority. We ought not to have a situation where dead people are voting in the state of Oregon. These are examples of things that we can undertake to change that political dynamic, and I think we have to do it. Finally, I think there's the need to change our expectation about the role that government is going to play. Government, I think, is going to be doing less and less in terms of direct service provision. It's going to be less a provider and more a partner, and probably a limited partner at that. Part of the driving force behind it is that the whole underpinnings of government finance are going to change radically over the next 10 years. It's already underway with the deregulation of the utility industry, what we're seeing in terms of internet commerce, utility franchise fees, transportation resources that are based on fuel consumption. These are a declining base. It's not going to be there, and we're going to have to get more entrepreneurial. I think part of what we can use in terms of recasting through the initiative process the roles and responsibilities of government. We can enable government to have more management over its own enterprises, the management of the right-of-way, who pays for the benefits that are received. These are things you probably can't get through the state legislature. But they are things where we can make a case to the public and get them enacted. Last, I guess I want to put in a plug for campaign finance reform. I've talked about this. In fact, that was the first presentation I made before the City Club. I was a member of a campaign finance reform committee more years ago than I can remember. Actually, it was before women were in the City Club. That's how long ago it was. I am optimistic that at some point we may get something through Congress, but there's something that I would ask you to do right now. Every time I have a chance to deal with the business community or any of the so-called special interests, I ask them to implement an immediate campaign finance reform. Do not contribute to somebody you wouldn't hire or that you would be afraid to be trapped in an elevator with. It will save you a lot of money. You'll feel better. The political process will be improved. I'm suggesting that we get organized, we get entrepreneurial, and we go to the initiative to be able to set the rules. Oregonians, I feel, like most Americans, are going to respond rationally if we give them the information and if we give them the tools to evaluate that information. Portland is now faced with the consequences of 30 years of work promoting livable communities. We have more wealth, we have more talent, we have 150 years of history, many extraordinary things to celebrate, and we've got some big issues before us and some appropriate dates. We think about things differently during a period of time when there are zeros involved. The millennium coming is going to force us to think differently. Mr. Walsh has some big plans about the bicentennial for Lewis and Clark that will, I think, help us adjust to some of our thinking about our relationship to this region, to ourselves, to others, and to technology. But the point I would like to leave you with is that our struggle in this region and in this state for livable communities is not just something that's going to maintain our quality of life. People around the country are looking at what we have accomplished. They are beating a path to the doors of many of you here, interviewing you. They watch what happens here much more closely than you can imagine. It sends shockwaves. Our ability to build on this foundation and to follow through on it is going to profoundly affect our ability to be successful nationally in changing priorities and encouraging people to undertake the struggle for more livable communities. So the issue here today is not just protecting our quality of life, but it is something that has profound implications for our country as well as for our families. I appreciate very much the opportunity to be with you, to share some thoughts and observations, and I look forward to the conversation portion of our discussion.
The bow tie won't fit, Earl, so thank you. Earl, 30 years ago when you were in the legislature and I was working for Governor Tom McCall, we worked together, I remember, to create a program which ultimately became Oregon's mandated statewide land use process. And similar efforts around that time took place nationally. In Congress, Senator Scoop Jackson and a number of others tried unsuccessfully to get a similar measure passed in Congress for the entire country. Obviously, that effort failed and never was resurrected. Oregon's has succeeded. So with a renewed interest, my question here, with a renewed interest in smart growth and the kind of sustainable, healthy cities you've spoken of, you think the time has come to recognize that perhaps it's in the national interest to have a federally mandated land use program that might be patterned after the Oregon process?
Well, I'm going to show my age here a little bit, or my conservative instincts. I do believe that the federal government has a very strong role to play in promoting sensible land use around the country. And if you'd asked me that question in 1974 when Senator Jackson introduced national legislation, I would have been supportive. Much in the same way that I was supportive of city-county consolidation in the early 70s. And thanks to my strong advocacy in my district, it only went down 2-1. I, of course, was devastated, thought the world would come to an end. But out of that defeat, actually we were able to grow something in this region, and again, a number of you were a part of it, that was the two-tiered system of governance. That wasn't just a consolidated government for half the region, but it was a two-tiered metropolitan government that actually was better than the consolidation. We were able to work together between the city and the county to sort of rationalize the delivery of services. I think we can do the same thing on the federal level. I think the federal government ought to do three things. First and foremost, it ought to practice what it's telling other people to do. That's why I've got the little bill on the post office obeying local land use laws, zoning codes. I think if the federal government would behave in conjunction with local land use laws, planning, zoning, environmental regulations, our leading by example would speak volumes and make a big difference. Secondly, the federal government ought to provide a series of incentives for people to do their work regionally in terms of watersheds, airsheds, transportation sheds. Finally, I think it's appropriate in some areas for us to make some changes in things like flood insurance. We should stop paying people to live in areas where God doesn't want them. It's part of what I was saying earlier in terms of we don't need a lot of new rules and regulations and new money if we think smarter and build on our experience. And we can bring together Republicans and Democrats and conservatives and liberals and a lot of people around the country. Not everybody. There are some that have a vested interest in what they call carpet insurance, you know, getting flooded out every year and getting inflated value. I mean, there are some that it's going to be a struggle. But I believe that we are better off with the federal government setting the framework for our providing incentives, and for our getting our own house in order, and promoting what's happening in state after state with statewide land use planning. I think we'll get there faster, and frankly, I think it'll be a better product.
I'm going to break my long-standing rule and ask a question. I'm Gretchen Gafori, and I'm a City Club member, and I have a cold. That's why I sound this way.
Echinacea.
Echinacea, I took some, thank you.
Okay.
I was intrigued, Earl, with your fifth point about inclusivity, or that's how I heard you saying it, about accepting all people as part of this livable communities, that we're going to have to be inclusive. I've been very, very troubled here in Portland, and I know Commissioner Lynn is working on this at the county, and people are, Eric Sten at the city, trying to find ways not to overregulate it, but to work through these issues in our communities. It isn't just the mentally ill or criminals that people are opposed to right now. We're having huge eruptions of people who are angry about renters. You know, it's gone from the row houses of the 80s to the renters. Now we're against renters. What can we do about this? I agree that we don't need a lot of more laws and rules, but I do believe we've got to up the level of civility, or we're going to lose the livability battle right on the ground.
I don't think there are any shortcuts to empowering citizens. What I said in terms of, I think that citizens, given the tools, the information, and the opportunity to participate, I am struck that on balance they make the right decisions. That when we I'm very impressed that when citizens in Salt Lake City and Athens, Georgia, started designing their own communities, they came up with plans that looked suspiciously like 2040. And I guess what I've been impressed in Portland with what people have been willing to do with Metro and the involvement with the 2040 plan. What's happened with the city of Portland, with whether it's visual preference survey or there's a housing conference, I think, this weekend. We've got a Johnson Creek Summit. We've had, you're well aware of the transportation class we had at Portland State University. I don't think we've done enough to sort of push those limits of citizen education and involvement. So I think we need to keep experimenting about ways to engage and inform the citizenry in the planning process. I'm not convinced we've done all we can do in the community. And I'm not, okay, never.
Some people are just plain mean, though, to their neighbors. And I want to know how we deal with them. Intolerant.
I think, Gretchen, part of it, there are two elements from where I sit, is that there are a lot more people that are out there that would be involved. And I don't think, I personally don't feel like I've done enough to engage people in the community in terms of brown bags and outreach to try and engage folks. And that's one of the commitments I've been making to try and do more personally. I think that there's a case of organizing and bringing people together. It's having more citizens interacting with other citizens and finding creative ways like other citizen planning processes that provide positive incentives for citizen involvement. I have some biases that I can share later, and if there are people here who would like, at some point, I'll buy the first pitcher of lemonade at some point to talk about those techniques. But I think we've done a lot of them in the past, and I think it's investing more in what you're doing now. I don't think there's any shortcut to it. Part of it is a lot of us in this room, and why I feel it's so important to bring in new people and not let anybody off the hook to go someplace else, is that at times we don't care as much as some of the cranky people. And I just use the example of gun legislation, where there's a tiny fraction of people in this country who are dominating the discussion about gun violence. We have lost 750,000 people to gun violence since 1960. And part of it that troubles me is it may be that some of the rest of us don't care as much as the people we disagree with. And I think that's part of what we need to do.
Ralph Crawshaw, City Club member. Yesterday, Congressman, I was privileged to visit the Bull Run Forest Reserve, Portland's gem. And it stimulates a two-part question that could benefit from a Washington viewpoint. The first is about policy. Up there, one of the rivers I saw was the Little Sandy River. The Little Sandy River is not at all connected with the Sandy River. It's part of the Bull Run watershed. Along the way, could Congress straighten out the geography, the designation of that little stream by changing that? The other thing that, it isn't a big thing. The second is, there are 350 miles of road in the Bull Run Reserve. 150 of those miles are useful. The remaining 200 are abandoned highways. They are the most serious threat to the quality of Portland's water. Now, that stewardship falls to the Forestry Service to take care of that. And as you know, and everybody knows, the Forestry Service has been so severely cut in its budget that there's no real prospect that those 200 miles are going to be taken care of, and that we are going to have a lot of erosion up there. Now, I'm not asking you to change a name here or anything, but what are your thoughts about that?
One of the reasons why I was spending time with my colleagues from the Interior Subcommittee on Appropriations is to try and focus on issues of that nature. Over 50% of the water in the state of Oregon that people use for their own personal use comes from federal lands. And we don't have adequate resources in, for example, decommissioning roads. I have been supportive of that on the federal level. We've been working with some of our colleagues, part of it is going to have a realistic federal budget policy that adjusts the caps to deal with things like this in investing in the future. I'm hopeful that we will have more people pay attention to it, not just here, but around the country.
Robert Liberty, City Club member. Earl, I want to say first that I suspect that the audience here doesn't appreciate how much you've been doing nationally to sell the message of planned growth, of quality of life, smart growth. And I think you are making a big difference on the national scene. And it's not reported in the Oregonian, but I think it's very important work, and we appreciate it. Now, speaking as part of the renter scum class, I want to follow up with a suggestion from Gretchen Kafoury. For many years now, the federal government has tied for decades the transfer of funds for various grants to certain requirements of non-discrimination. The federal government couldn't conceivably send money to a community that prohibits African Americans from living in it. But all over the United States, and this is not true in Oregon thanks to our planning laws, all over the United States, entire cities zone out apartments, mandate large lot sizes for houses, even have square footage requirements. And these tools of local government, of zoning, are used to regulate people, to separate people by class. So they can't live in the community where they work, where they teach the kids, or they mow the lawn, or pick up the garbage. Has there been any discussion in Congress about whether or not it's appropriate to provide federal monies to communities that are discriminating against people based on class and therefore indirectly on race as well? And that's an idea that might follow up on Gretchen's suggestion.
There has been some sort of late night sessions where we've talked about reconfiguring some of the discretionary dollars that do flow, like the Community Development Block Grant, giving incentives to some and taking money away from others who don't meet certain criteria. I do think that there's something that can be done along this line. I think it's a couple of steps removed, but I am encouraged by the coalitions, and you've seen them with your state growth management coalition or whatever. I don't know what sinister group you call it. It's a sinister group. I don't know what you call it.
The name's secret, Earl. I'm not going to repeat it.
Okay.
You know, it's just been renamed the Growth Management Leadership Alliance.
That there is an emerging coalition that we're seeing in terms of inner city and first-tier suburbs, where we're seeing the community of faith in different parts of the country, the Catholic Church. There are others that are stepping forward that might be a part of an effort that could be cast in positive terms, providing incentives and providing some regional solutions that could be tied to other resources like transportation, water, and environmental cleanup.
Thank you.
Ray Polani, a City Club member. Earl, as with the arts, livability and sustainability are a question of money and what it is devoted to, where it goes. Increasing the gas tax and registration fees for roads and highways only. What about money for the transit alternative? Unless we make it much better, so the question really is how to switch the money to transit. Some advice from Washington?
Well, I think it goes back to the point that Gretchen Kafoury raised. You know, there are a number of people in this room who felt that for years all we need to do is change the state constitution so we can spend more gas tax on transit. But the federal legislation that we passed, I fought hard to keep, allows the state of Oregon to flex hundreds of millions of dollars. I see one of our transportation commissioners here, John Russell. There's an amazing struggle going on now with what I think is one of the best transportation agencies in the country. Many of you know Grace Kruniken and people that are there. That's undergone a major change. It's held out as a model nationally. But we have people in the legislature who would dismember it. There are people in the legislature who would commit us to a very specific set of road projects where there is no money to maintain it after it's constructed. And I think Mr. Russell even has a video that he'll show some of you that talk about what happens if we don't manage the right-of-way. We'll end up just making each of these things worse over time. Ray, I think that it's part of our struggle to help make sure that citizens understand how the transportation system works, that more citizens here, and we've got some of the most enlightened citizen advocates for transportation in the metropolitan area you'll find anywhere in the country, lots of them. They don't always agree with each other, let alone with me, but there's a lot of energy here to be able to focus on things that we do agree upon, and that there are better ways of using the resources that we've got now. There is no substitute for our developing grassroots support for making those transportation decisions that make things better rather than worse. We have had an extraordinary success in metropolitan Portland. Most people don't appreciate. I think this is the only metropolitan area in the country where vehicle miles traveled has gone up at a slower rate than transit ridership. Is it perfect? No. But we've made some extraordinary progress. We've got some things on the ground, and we've got to build on that citizen momentum. Otherwise, we're going to be, I think, hammered.
I agree with you.
Dan Goldie, member. Earl, I want you to put your congressional bow tie on now, and not the city council one. You've made...
They wouldn't let me wear this in the city council. There's city ordinances, noise ordinance, I think.
You've made the point very effectively that a sustainable community means a great many things. A lot of programs, a lot of activity across the board. All dependent, though, on a general climate of economic prosperity. Resources have to be there. Now, your colleagues, your Republican colleagues, if I can call them that, in the Congress.
You can call them Republicans.
Seem to be bent on several policies that could make it all impossible. One, cross-the-board tax cuts to stimulate the economy at a time when the Federal Reserve Board is raising interest rates to keep the economy from being overstimulated. I mean, to tone it down. Two, the budget problem. If I hear them correctly, they're talking about draconian cuts in all of the social programs across the board that would make sustainable communities impossible. My question to you is, as a representative of ours in that august body in Washington, what can be done to bring some common sense to that institution?
I do think that the budget drama that is being played out in Washington, D.C. is as serious as anything that we've talked about here. And Dan, I don't think you've overstated it at all. I didn't vote for the 1997 balanced budget agreement because I didn't think Congress had any intention of abiding by it. I didn't think that, I thought it was a pre-election ploy where, and sadly it wasn't, it wasn't just the Republicans who did that. There were lots of Democrats who were willing to pat themselves on the back, including the president, for having balanced the budget and done all of these things, claiming credit before an election. We've done this twice now. And now we're seeing the consequences of it. There's no way in the world that we're going to inflict those cuts, but we have gridlock at this point. Luckily, we've got an uptick in the budget projections. I guess that's lucky. I personally find that rather unsettling because people might make some very unwise long-term budget decisions based on those projections. If you go back the last 15 years and look at the budget projections that we made, and then take those budget projections and go out 5 years,